Good afternoon. Welcome back. I hope all of you have enjoyed a nice lunch and had a little bit of time to also listen to our folks at HCD. My name is Carol Ornelas, and I'm the CEO of Visionary Home Builders. We're located in Stockton, California. And I'm also a proud member of the Board of Directors for Housing California. My job here today is to talk a little bit about our housekeeping. First, we want to ensure that you've had the best possible conference experience, whether in person or virtually. Please check out your confirmation email and conference user guide. Our virtual events platform/mobile app, Whova. How many of you have trouble saying Whova? I had a little bit of trouble. Whova is also a great source of information. Second, because our event is a hybrid this year, there are 4 ways for participants to take part in sessions. Virtual only. If you look at your program, it will say virtual only. Virtual with an in-person participation option. In-person only, and in-person with a virtual participation option. Please check out your user guide for more information. Third, for those of you attending in person, please remember to leave the event immediately if you have COVID-19 symptoms or find out you were in close contact with someone that has tested positive. If you haven't already grabbed a ribbon for your badge, that shows your comfort level with physical distancing during the event. Wear a mask covering your face, mouth at all times, except while actively eating, drinking, or presenting. We will provide social distancing space for eating at conference provided meals. You are welcome to eat throughout the conference space. Last, but certainly not least, we encourage you to visit in-person exhibit hall and virtual exhibit halls in Whova and meet all our amazing sponsors. Now I would like to invite a very special lady to our stand here, Parika Bell of Union Bank, one of our title sponsors, up to the stage to provide a few remarks and introduce this afternoon's plenary with inspiring and visionary local leaders. We are incredibly grateful for Union Bank's steady and consistent support of the conference over the years. Thank you again, and I look forward to engaging in this plenary with all of you.
Thank you, Carol. Once again, my name is Parika Bell with Union Bank's Community Development Finance Group. I will echo the sentiments that I've heard throughout the day and just say once again, I am so pleased. We are so pleased to see you all and be among you all, to share fellowship and stories, to be among you all again is just simply wonderful. Union Bank is especially proud to support the mission-critical acts that Housing California members engage in day to day to create and sustain affordable housing communities. Over the past couple of years, we have all witnessed or experienced events that have challenged us to be more outspoken, to be louder, to be kinder, to sit in discomfort outside of our usual comfort spaces, to fight for other people who might not have the right to fight, or the voice, or the positioning. And it is those events and those challenges that I am pleased and privileged to introduce this afternoon's plenary. Creating big structural change requires innovation, bold and outrageous and courageous leadership, strong messages, and people power. And during this engaging discussion that you'll hear today, You'll hear from 2 local leaders who have taken big risks at the local level, even in the face of opposition, in the face of discomfort, to ensure safe, stable, affordable housing for all. We hope that you leave this plenary inspired and ready to go home and create lasting change in your communities. It's now my honor to introduce Steve Russell, who will serve as our moderator of this panel. Steve is president and CEO of the San Diego Housing Federation. He is a longtime friend of affordable housing, and he is also a Housing California board member. Please join me in welcoming Steve. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Parika, and thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon for this great session. I think we're going to find some really interesting content here today when we talk about how the things that are done at the state level, they're really very real when we bring them down to the community level. And so our leaders today are going to be from the community and talking about how they've faced some of the challenges and made advancements at the local level. Today, I have the honor of moderating this dialogue between 2 local council members who are boldly working to create a California with homes, health, and wealth for all. So I will do a brief introduction of each of the council members and then invite them one by one up to the stage. I would ask you to turn to their bios in the Whova app. And by the way, when I try to say it, I think of Whoville, and it kind of comes out the right way. So the Whoville app has the biographies of these 2 amazing leaders, and there's much more than I would embarrass them if I stood up here and read those whole bios, but I ask you to read them and think about the incredible work that they're doing. We will have a dialogue, so we'll have a dialogue here, and then we will be taking questions. And so there's staff here who will be collecting the questions on cards. So if you fill out a question, you have a card you want to hand up, hold it up, and someone will get that card. They'll bring them up to the stage for the discussion at the end. If you're a virtual participant, please put your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom throughout the session. And again, there's paper and pencil on the tables for all of you to write your questions. So let me start off. First, I'll introduce Councilmember Carol Fife, Councilmember for District 3, which represents Oakland's downtown and west side. She's a former director of ACE Oakland, a leader in tenant protections, and an outspoken voice for communities' self-determination. Let me welcome to the stage Councilmember Carol Fife. Thank you. Also with us today, we have Councilmember Katie Valenzuela, a Councilmember from District 4 in Sacramento. She's a founding member of the Sacramento Community Land Trust and a state leader in climate change and is working for the state legislature in the past. So let's welcome to the stage Councilmember Katie Valenzuela.
Oh, you switched up. I did. That's fine.
And these are funny chairs to sit on, by the way. If you think it's awkward to sit in a little lounge in front of everybody,
Yeah,
it is.
Try it in a dress, Steve.
Well, as a queer American, maybe one time I will, but not today. Not today. So anyway, I want to welcome you both here to the stage, and I think everyone's in a good mood for a good conversation. Yes? Okay, good. So let me start with vision. This morning, we heard from state leaders who shared their vision for creating a California with homes, health, and wealth for all. I'll start with you, Katie, could you start with your vision of that California?
Oh, for me, and I'll first just start by saying I'm a little distracted today, and I want to thank you all so much for coming to downtown as we're recovering from a really big tragedy just a couple of days ago. And so thank you for being here and for giving me an excuse to get back to that other part of my brain on policy here today with you all. And for me, it's very connected, and part of why I bring up that tragedy is it's about confronting racial inequity, it's about confronting power, and access to capital and economic opportunity at its core. And that starts by giving people a place to go, having a place they can be, but it also goes so much more than that, in a voice and decisions and investments that impact them, making sure that they really have a seat at the table and that we're confronting those inequities at the root with them in partnership.
Super. So, Councilmember Fife, would you like to share your vision?
That's challenging, and putting that in words in a way that's concise, I think the best way to explain it is just a place where people can be their full selves. So my vision for California is a place where people can thrive and live and be whole and complete people, and in spite of all of the challenges that we face, but that there's equity in their experiences of life so they can live thriving and robust lives here.
Would you be willing to share one of your proudest achievements toward that vision?
I am quite, what's the word? I'm hard on myself, and there's very little that I'm proud of. And I think that's partly because I really am invested in change, and I don't see the change that I want to see or that people deserve in this world. I'll be proud when I see more experiences of, that reach past rhetoric and slogans, but see a realistic and broad-based change in the way that people experience their lives. There's so much trauma. And I think that's partly why I'm able to get up every day. Is that me? It's why I fight the way that I do, because I really want to see it. And until I see it, then I'm just going to keep on working. And it's probably not the healthiest, but it definitely keeps me active.
Well, I can tell you a lot of the folks who are here today come to this event because it gives them hope, because we stand up, we look at each other, we reflect on one another's values. And so I hope you walk away from this crowd with some of that love, respect, and a sense of accomplishment, because you've earned it. And many in this room have earned it, but we have to remind ourselves constantly. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
So Katie, would you share one of your greatest accomplishments?
I will say we were really fortunate to come into our council seat in the middle of a general plan update. And so we got the opportunity to really vote on inclusionary zoning policies. We're doing a study now to try to set up bringing that back, which I'm very open about the need for us to have stronger policies. We did, we changed our zoning to end exclusionary practices of single-family zoning in neighborhoods that had largely been built. Thank you. That had largely been built to be exclusively white. We can talk about this, right, with racial covenants and policies that we know existed in these areas. And we set up a lot of really great conversation with our housing policy working group on vacancy taxes, on community opportunity to purchase, on public banking. We actually had, part of our resolution was that we wanted to work on a public bank so that we could finance more housing development and make it more affordable. So it's not an accomplishment yet in say, it's that I feel like we're setting a framework now that we can work with the community to make some real lasting change, and came in at the right moment.
Go SAC.
And we became the first pro-housing city in the state of California, so I have to brag with us a little bit. I hear somebody in the back. That was a lot of hard work, and I came into a lot of hard work that our planning staff was doing, but it's our first environmental justice element. It was our first really big zoning change since in a while, and so I'm really happy that I'm here for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is. Well, if I may go briefly off script a little bit here, do you feel under extra scrutiny in Sacramento as the state capital? You have state forces who are present, who maybe see as Sacramento goes, maybe goes the state. Do you feel that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, nobody else has a lot of senators and assembly members as their constituents for 2/3 of the year, and there's nothing like getting a call from a state senator that their trash didn't get picked up today, and can I do something about that, please? And I'm like, okay, Senator. So it's a really unique place to represent because I have the whole central city and now parts of East Sac and the River District, and so it's we do see them, and they're here all the time, and they live here, and a lot of them own properties here, and so they have a very distinct edge, and they're calling me about ADU policies and what are you doing with this and how can I make this in my backyard, and so it's really great. But when we set up our first safe camping ground here, which we did just about a year ago this month, thank you, it was a big effort on a lot of advocates' parts, but it was a stone's throw away from some of the senators that sit on these housing committees, and I'm like, hey, you want to go on a tour? So it is unique, but I do believe what happens in Sacramento influences a lot of what happens at the Capitol. I hope it does anyways.
Absolutely. Well, we also often say that local government is the laboratory of democracy. And I guess I would ask, and let me go back to Councilmember Fife here, if you see your role as a local leader in addressing California's housing affordability problem and homelessness crisis, how do you see it in terms of like being this laboratory of democracy at local government? So how do you see your work in homelessness and affordable housing maybe in that lens?
If it is the laboratory, then I think it's a place where we are actually testing out different models and different things that could potentially work. I honestly think that we could be doing a lot more locally around new alternatives to standing up solutions for people who are living unsheltered. But I find in local government, people are so used to doing things the same way, and we keep getting the same results while the conditions get worse. And it feels like, and I'm not sure if it's like this with you as well, but there are people who've worked in my city government for decades, like 10, 20, 30 years, and they understand that they will outlast elected officials, right? So they don't necessarily have to move in the way that we are suggesting that they move, because they know that their tenure is longer. So city staff have a lot of power in the places where you think your vote matters. So that's why it's important, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit later, of always having that grassroots energy that's pushing from the outside so they can help our voices on the inside.
Well, and can I do a follow-on, and I'll ask you the same question later, is what do you think is possible at the local level that may not be possible, at least yet, at the state level?
I think it is trying some of those different models. Like, for instance, I am one of 2 council members who set up co-governed encampments, and that is with a nonprofit provider, ensuring that at this space that we're currently occupying in my district, it's a Caltrans-owned lot. And so we've converted that into homeless housing, emergency housing, and it's gone amazingly well. And we can finance those, robustly finance them, not putting people in tool sheds and calling it a day. But we can have units where people have heat, where they can have electricity, where they can have running water. And if we truly finance those and resource those, which we need state funding, philanthropic and private funding as well, then we can actually create solutions. So we can try different things here. At the local level that it might be difficult to do at the state, but we definitely need the resources to do that well.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And so, Katie, to ask the same questions of you, how do you see your role as a local leader in addressing California's affordable housing and homelessness crisis?
I think it's important that we personalize it. You know, there's stories of on-the-ground efforts, which a lot of my constituents are very big fans of what Carol's been doing in Oakland. And it's also about telling those stories of the constituents that are falling through the cracks, of the people who didn't get the emergency road assistance on time, of the folks who are still out there barely holding on, because we hear those stories every day. I mean, I'm still haunted by a story someone told me when I was campaigning because her husband was dying. She lived in this terrible apartment. I remember walking through this complex thinking, like, I don't know if I should be here on my own, but I was there. And so I'm like, I'm going to knock on all these doors. And I met this incredible woman who was getting ready to buy a better car because she knew that when her husband died, she wouldn't be able to afford that apartment any longer. Mm-hmm. And so she was just making the plan for when he's gone, I'm going to need to probably live in my car for a little while. And those are the stories that we hear every day because our staff, our teams are seeing these emails, we're getting these calls, and we're having to sometimes tell them, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And it's important that we use those experiences and those stories and lift them up to these state and federal decision makers because we do sometimes really need their help. There is only so much we can do at the local level, and we'll do everything we can, but sometimes we need help. We need backup at a much higher level than we have right now.
Well, and so the follow-on question I ask is, what do you see as possible at the local level that may not yet be possible at the statewide level?
I think some of the experimentation around just different approaches, different ideas is very possible. I think project by project, you know, we have some really innovative developers here, nonprofit, for-profit, that are doing some really incredible things that I think could teach, and working with teams like our Housing and Redevelopment Agency, SHRA there in front, and other folks to try out new strategies, and if they work, then why not? You know, we had some really cool ideas brought to us around middle income affordability and how we could attain those things by just simply pulling parcels out of the market, similar to what
Right.
land trusts do, and by being able to protect them with those lower rents long term. I think we're trying to innovate in a way that gives the state legislature and the federal government the ability to say, hey, it worked here, why can't it work elsewhere? But I don't always see that come through, and so I think, you know, we keep trying these innovative ideas and then kind of hitting a wall, as was mentioned, with funding and with the policy support long term. But I have to give props to, I think the city of Sacramento, we're really lucky with the teams we have, both at SHRA and the city. We brought in a lot of young planners, a lot of new blood, and I think that it's leading to us trying a lot of things that we wouldn't try. And we're watching what other cities are doing with vacancy tax measures, with tenant protection measures, and trying to glean from that as well.
Well, so can I flip that question on its head then and say, so what is going on at the state level that gives does things that you couldn't do locally? And I'll start with you and then move.
Emergency rent assistance. I can't say that enough, and I know a lot of you in this room are working on that. We absolutely need more funding from the state for emergency rent assistance. We have yes, I mean, please, if there's a state lawmaker watching this online, like, please, like, we absolutely need more of that funding because we have a lot of folks that are still on the precipice of losing their housing, and it's scary for a lot of them who are reaching out to our teams. But I think so the funding is a big piece of it beyond that as well. We applied for the Home Key grants and got a couple projects here in Sacramento. Again, props to our SHRA and city teams. But, we only got 2, and it's great. It's going to be a couple hundred units in the end, but we've got maybe 10,000 people at last count that are unhoused, and that doesn't even make a dent in the policies that we need to try to keep folks who are housed in their housing. So I think the vouchers have been a huge challenge. That would be great to get more state assistance on. I mean, we've really been struggling with voucher placement. We have a lot of folks, and somebody I met at our warming center a few months ago said, I've had this voucher for months and I can't find anything. Like, where am I supposed to go with this? And so there's these kinks in the system that I think clear direction from the state would really help us address. And I have a lot of optimism when I hear about the bills a lot of you are pushing in the legislature, and I hope we can help get those across the finish line.
And so the same question to you, Councilmember Fife. How has the statewide action and policy change helped in this vital work?
I want to second the emergency rent assistance. I know we had some challenges in the city of Oakland just getting the money out of the door and getting it, especially to non-English speakers. There were a lot of challenges there, so I would support that. But I also think that we need to have more investment in acquisition of existing affordable housing, right? That's something that we did early on, and it was before I was elected, actually, when I was working with ACE, to get land trust funding to organizations that would rehab and acquire and rehab buildings that were fewer than 50 units. I've talked to developers that say they don't get out of bed for anything less than 100 units. And a lot of our naturally occurring, if you can use that word, naturally occurring affordable housing was 25 units or less. That's where the majority of our residents live. And so when that housing is at risk, it jeopardizes an entire population of people. So ACK rehab, I think, is an important area of investment that's kind of overlooked.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, so maybe we could go into land trusts and talk a little bit about the place that you see in your community for land trusts as a vehicle to create and protect long-term affordability. And Councilmember Fife?
I was really happy that, I'm not sure if you all heard of Moms for Housing, but it was a little thing that happened.
A little thing. I didn't, maybe I
did. A little thing. And that actually was a proud moment because there were people from all over the world that were reaching out to us around how can we just take our lives into our own hands and do what you did in Oakland, which for folks who don't know, just briefly, we found in Oakland that there are 4 vacant units for every 1 unsheltered person living on the streets of Oakland. And several of my staff members, when I was the director at this nonprofit, came to me asking me for support and finding a place to stay. And at the time, I didn't have, and today, not just at that time, I didn't have the resources to be able to say, hey, this is affordable housing, this is accessible. I know these people, I have this hookup. None of that existed. So I said, hey, I don't have anything to give you. I wish I did, but if you trust me at the end of this process, we're gonna find housing for you and your families. So, we took over a house. We took over a vacant speculator house in West Oakland and forced into a dialogue and changed the narrative around housing and who has access and who can own it. And so out of that process, we were able to purchase this home. All of the mothers that were part of Moms for Housing did obtain housing, and we were able to purchase the home and rehab it for transitional housing for homeless mothers. And out of that, we created a land trust, the Moms for Housing Land Trust. And so we're doing that work of trying to find underutilized or vacant properties that have been neglected. There's a lot that's in disrepair in our city. And rehabbing those spaces, creating jobs for people in that process, and getting people housed. So I think that's an area, out of that, there grew state legislation, right? Senator Nancy Skinner created SB 1079, an anti-flipping and law that went into effect a couple years ago. I think that was moving in the right direction. Still, there's so much work to do in the Capitol, but land trust can play an important role for people who want to move into home ownership but don't have the access to do the traditional route. And I want to get into home ownership a little later. There's a lot of talk about that. And if we're going to be challenging systems, which is what I do, we're going to have a real brutal conversation about what that means, especially for people who've been locked out of home ownership in this country. But land trusts play a vital role, I think, for people who can't go in the traditional route, but want to have the security of being able to say, I am rooted in my city.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And Councilmember Valenzuela, would you care to talk about land trusts a little bit and the important role they can play?
Yeah, I was joking before that I could talk about land trust for the rest of the day. So if you all want to hang out for a little bit.
This room would be pretty cool
We
with
could
that,
have a
but-
teach-in on land trusts and what they do. But, I was proud to help start the Sacramento Community Land Trust here. And I think it's such a critical mechanism because so often I hear policymakers say, well, we just don't know what to do about gentrification. We just don't know what to do. I'm like, yeah, we do. We know exactly what we need to do. We need to protect the renters who are there and the homeowners who are there. We need to be building more affordable housing and getting more first-time homeowner assistance in the door. But land trusts are a critical piece of this because they simply pull properties out of the market, right? It just means you can still build equity, you can still buy and sell your property, but you're not selling it on the open market. You're selling it back to the trust, who's then selling it to the next person. And it gives you a security and a community safety net that we've really lost in our country because you're now connected. So we are very connected in Sacramento, sorry to the mic guys, with what's happening in Oakland. And the Oakland Land Trust was super instrumental to us in the People's Housing and Land Conferences. And it's where a lot of these ideas on public banking and infrastructure have come from because what they're doing in the Bay gives us a roadmap, not just for Sacramento, but other cities to say, hey, we need a different way to access capital. We need these tools in our toolbox so that we can really address the crisis with people at the center. And Sacramento, unfortunately, has not yet dedicated public funding to help support the land trust efforts, but it is something that I'm hopeful now that they have over 100 members across some of our most impacted zip codes in the county, that they can really be well positioned to be a part of that solution. We have to think outside of the box. We're never going to build our way out of this crisis.
That's right.
We need to start protecting the housing we have and protecting the people that's in them right now. So it's a really great tool. And like I said, I'll stop there because I don't want to turn this into just a land trust talk, but I can.
I've got a follow-up. I've got a follow-up
Okay.
for you, which is really talking about the challenges that you've seen in sustaining land trust organizations. I mean, nationally, the experience has been, they need to be fed.
Yep.
So could you talk about some of the more institutional or financial support that we need to provide to create the right ecosystem for land trusts?
Yeah, and there was just a great study funded with the California Endowment where the Sacramento, Oakland, East LA, South LA, and I'm missing one. Santa Ana got together and did a whole study on financing mechanisms. And so now this work is out there about different ways, because you can make land trusts financially sustainable. And so what they were looking at was essentially, how do you bring in that additional capital and how do you sustain? How do you reach that point? So I think a lot of land trusts can tell you at what point they would be sustainable, how many properties they need to get to before they feel like they'd have enough lease payments coming in that they could really sustain the model. But in the end, this is going to take, at the beginning at least, public investment. And it's going to take that partnership and that collaboration and that willingness to be a little outside of the box, to look to things that work Carroll's just an hour and a half away from us, and look what they've done there. And so we can take that and use that here, but we need to have that faith, and that it can work here too, and to try.
Well, we created a bond measure, right? Well, we didn't create it for that specific purpose, but we had an infrastructure bond measure and allocated a percentage of that. Well, it wasn't a percentage, it was $12.5 million for our land trust in Oakland, and that was very, very helpful. It helped with several acquisitions, and we are looking to reauthorize that bond because it expired last year. So we're looking to reauthorize that, and now that I'm on the council, I can have a little more say in that process, although we created the set aside for land trusts in Oakland when I wasn't on the council. So there's power wherever you are. Just remember that. You can make things move.
See, look, we got to follow. Okay, Sacramento people, you hear this? Bond measure for housing. Christine, we're going to do this. Once again, following in Oakland's footsteps.
Well, to go back to the state-local link, are the things the state could do, and I'll start with you and Councilmember Fife, is that the state could do to support those kinds of efforts and sustainability?
We have been pushing our representatives in the Bay for the last several years around doing just that, which is we need an ongoing set of funds that we can use specifically for affordable housing, for land trusts, and a myriad of solutions that we have. We just have to have the will. And I know oftentimes California gets pointed to as this leftist liberal state, but when it comes to housing, and I'm saying this from a lot of activism over the years, California is very conservative when it comes to housing policy. And I'm proud of it. We've shut down the Capitol just trying to get legislators to listen to us. And I was listening to the testimony of a family who ended up having to live in an RV after being evicted from their home. And they're just like, we are one of thousands of people who are being pushed onto the streets because the rents are too damn high. How many years have we been saying this? And the more that you get people who are disgruntled, whose needs are not being met, the more you create a base of individuals who have nothing to lose. And that is not healthy for any of us. So if the state doesn't recognize the problem that housing is, and that it should be a human right, just like air and water. If someone tried to privatize the air and sell it to you for a profit, people would be like, wait, you can't do that. We should have the same feelings around housing. So the state needs to prioritize an ongoing source of funding to address the crisis that housing is.
Yep.
I know it's a lot to follow on. Would you like to follow on that?
I will follow on because I also think that we've got to talk about investors. We've got to start talking about people who are coming in and buying up these units because we know it's happening. And it's happening at a rate that's startling and really scary. I'm reading articles about whole neighborhoods in the Midwest that are getting bought by one firm, and you're like, well, what does this mean? Do we talk to the city council or do we talk to the people who own the investment firm because they're the ones who own all of this land? We have to start interrupting those cycles. That's why I'm a big fan of things like Community Opportunity to Purchase Act and other strategies, but we keep butting up against this. It is now the most profitable thing that any finance person will tell you is to invest in housing, and there's a reason for that. And I always talk about in real numbers because I think people need to hear real numbers more. That just a few years ago in Sacramento, I was still able to find good apartments for less than $1,000. You could find a good apartment for $600 to $800, and today you are lucky to get a one-bedroom for less than $2,000. Today we are seeing studio apartments that are 500 square foot starting at $3,000 a month. That is so far beyond what the average person in Sacramento can afford, and we have to start talking about those real numbers. And part of what's driving it is this access to capital, is the financial folks who are coming in and swooping up. Most of our developers, they build their buildings, they sell them before they're even leased out because, gosh, you got 20 people sitting there ready to pay you top dollar. How do we interrupt that cycle? And that eventually is going to take state law. We have a lot of good actors who are willing to work with us to figure that out. Private developers who are like, okay, maybe instead of selling them to you, I'll sell it to you, and let's figure this out. And we're trying, but the state's got to figure out what we're going to do about investment firms buying up our housing because this is the real crisis we're looking down the line. And I don't know the answer to that right now, short of them acting.
Well, and let me follow on that because we recently had a case in San Diego at the beginning of this year where the Conrad Prebys Foundation had a portfolio of 6,000 apartments that they did a private sale to Blackstone. And those 6,000 units, which are all naturally affordable effectively, first of all, 6,000 units was $1.5 billion. So a couple things that come out of that. First of all, those 6,000 units we've lost to affordability. And that's 4 to 5 years worth of affordable housing production in our region. So those are never coming back. But the scale, you talk about numbers, $1.5 billion for a portfolio of 6,000 apartments. How do we get the capital to be able to do this? Have you given thought to ways that we can amass and have the institutions that are nimble enough to do the transactions? I mean, I hear you talk about the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act as a way.
Well, no, and I think giving those levers, which again, the Bay Area has it, DC has it, I mean, having those levers where you can interrupt and say, you know, before you sell it to the open market, just give them a little bit of time to be able to figure out if we can match the price and buy it as a community. But I mean, we've got to start taxing the wealthy. We've got to start taxing the corporations. We've got to start being real. I think, and I talk to legislators about this, and they're like, oh, well, if they leave, and maybe it needs to be federal policy, because I appreciate what they're saying is like, you know, if you start to really clamp down on these folks, they just bump their operations over into Nevada, and then like, what does that do? And so I think this is where I talk about the bigger strategies here, is us at the local level. Sorry, again, I keep hitting this, they probably hate me. But at the local level, there's some things we can do around COPA and TOPA and these strategies, but we're gonna keep bumping up against this unless we really talk about income inequality and about taxing people at the fair rates.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. That's something that we're wrestling with right now. It's legislation that I and the council president, Nikki Fortunato Bass, are doing in the city of Oakland, which is taxing these larger corporations for their operations in the city to increase our access to general purpose fund revenue to invest in affordable housing and other city services. And it's the same story every single time. If you do this, we will leave. If you do this, then we will be forced to pass through these increases to people who can't afford it. But those are all choices. And so I think you're right. I think federal legislation is necessary. And I think in Oakland, I'm just like, this is not a place where you want to be just like messing with people's lives. We are still a city of revolutionaries. And that's why we were able to build a movement off making a statement on one house. So I think federal legislation is necessary, and then we have to just continue to organize on the grassroots level. I think that's the pressure that I need to feel as an elected official, but it's also something I think our state officials need to feel a little bit more as well, because all of this is tied together. Campaign financing is tied to these big corporations who give big contributions to elected officials. There are no strings on me if anybody asks. So we just have to be really, really integrated with our approach about how we manage these large speculators who bundle and sell like it's nothing with billion-dollar portfolios. It's not okay.
Well, let's talk about, let's hear it. No, let's hear it for the council member here. Because a lot of times we're talking about wealth building and people living in rentals versus what we consider the American dream of owning a home. Now, some have argued that is a dream because we provide no other social safety net, and therefore the home ownership becomes everything. Can you share some thoughts about do you think that home ownership should be the primary way to develop generational wealth?
I was just speaking with my chief of staff about this. No, and I think George Carlin says it best, that they call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And I think there's true. Hey, clap it up for George Carlin. But I think when you base building generational wealth off in a topic or an issue or something that has not been made accessible to all Americans, then that in and of itself is discriminatory. And so now in 2022, home ownership for African Americans in this country is worse than it was in the 1950s, right? So we have less access to generational wealth and even the ability to access it than ever before in this country. And so one of the developers I was speaking to about this very topic was like, we're moving from once being property to not being able to afford property in this country. And until we address the issue of race, then we will continuously have problems with people being able to access this dream or even public education. I heard it early in the first plenary of today that one of the speakers was able to have access to affordable housing and then put her children through school and then buy a house and do all of the things that are associated with that. But that's just a small percentage of the Black community. And I say Black folks because I truly believe that Black people in America are the canaries in the mines for what everyone will experience if we don't address this very, very out of reach topic of commodified housing is the way to build wealth. I think it's extremely problematic. It's exclusionary and limiting because we don't have a social safety net. And they can make it happen in other countries, and I think we should make it happen here. Yeah. That's why I'm working on social housing in the city of Oakland and repealing Article 34.
So, Councilmember Valenzuela, some of your
what
thoughts?
she said. And I would just add that layer of practical, it's not possible right now. And I think we have to just accept that across California, we can't access housing. The door has closed. Unless you have a lot of cash, unless you're willing to walk in without an inspection, waive your escrow, do all of the things that nobody would ever tell you to do in actual real life, it is not possible. I am watching my friends, particularly my friends of color, who don't have a lot of energy. The door has closed for us. The door is gone. And in Sacramento, we have seen that. I've seen little teeny cute 2-bedroom apartments near me in Midtown, or houses, and I'm like, oh, that's really cute. What's it listed for? $800,000. What does it sell for? $100,000 over asking price. And I'm like, there's no way I can do that. And I make a good living. So it's just, it's gone. And so if this is the only way that we're allowing people to have economic security and access to capital, then we are screwed. We are screwed because the door has really closed in California. We've let it gone too far. And to claw that back now with all of the history of segregation and racist policies that persist. I remember when one of the Banks of America closed in our predominantly African-American neighborhood, we were fighting them on Community Reinvestment Act funding. And we found out after they closed that they had only initiated one home loan in the entire zip code the entire time they existed on Martin Luther King and Broadway, Christine. You know what I'm talking about. And I was like, what? One home loan the entire decades that you had been here. The door is past that point, and we have to be able to think beyond just home ownership if we're gonna have a society where people can take care of each other and afford to take care of their families and not be in financial crisis consistently.
That part.
Right. Well, so we have a question from someone in the audience here, and I'll let you decide which of you wants to take this first. We're asked, on land trusts, how do you balance the need to keep properties affordable while still giving low-income folks opportunity for wealth creation that home ownership allows?
You want to say?
Sure. I think when people are paying 30% or less of their income in rents, or even towards a mortgage with the limited equity that you can establish in a land trust, you can build those things into your life. Mm-hmm. I've talked to everyone that I know that is a part of a land trust community in the city of Oakland, and they would rather have the stability of being able to stay in the same place for as long as they choose than to have all of these other things that come with the challenges of trying to purchase a home. And so they're able to afford childcare and afford to send their kids to really good after-school programs and to give their families the things that they actually want to see. I do believe that there is a challenge when people are used to dealing with this concept of housing and the way that we've traditionally know it to be, because then you measure the two against each other. And if the goal is to build wealth and to be able to have a retirement because you're going to utilize your house is like the backup, then it may be a little challenging to you. But if you're able to save money that you weren't able to save and invested into a 401k or whatever, middle income people or working class people do, I think that gives you the freedom with the land trust because you know it's going to be always there, something that's affordable. A minimum lease that we have on the land that we utilize in Oakland is 99 years. Mm-hmm. And then it's also transferable to your heirs or to your family members. So I think it's a trade-off, but I think it's difficult to measure the two against each other when what you've been trained to understand is a traditional model of housing.
Mm-hmm. She nailed it.
Okay. Well then, this is a personal one. And so I'm going to ask for an answer from both of you, each of you. Can the council members speak to being powerful women in politics at a local level and offer any advice or suggestions for a young woman or young women who want to do the same?
You picked quite the week to ask me that question. I am also the only renter on our council. I very regularly hear that I have no business governing our city because I don't own property. I regularly hear that I don't know what I'm talking about when I present an encyclopedia of evidence and research and studies and best practices from other cities. I find all it really takes is somebody else to be like, I don't think so. I'm like, that's it? The end of the debate? So I think what's so important is to remember, A, to have a good network of people around you, because you need people. I remember my first meeting, this very subtle slight happened with one of my male colleagues, something that you probably wouldn't even notice if you weren't on the council, but it was a procedural thing where I was supposed to get to do something, and he just kind of jumped in and did it. And I remember my chief of staff called me and said, call him right now. Tell him not to do that next time, that you would appreciate the courtesy of being able to do what's right. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Is it really a big deal? But she's like, call him right now. Tell him that wasn't okay. And I needed in that moment for somebody to say, you're right. I need to assert myself and my position in this group as an equal and to say, don't do that. But you also have to remember, you know, my therapist and I talk a lot about being the representative of a community and how you don't often see the community, because when you're a leader, you're out in front. You know, when you're a leader, part of your job is to be that figurehead, to be that person that's standing at the podium saying the things and doing the things, but to remember the people behind you. And what I get a lot of strength from is the canvassing I did during my campaign, the community work I do now, because I meet people every day who look like me, who have my similar backgrounds, who say, I am so excited to see you there. You were speaking for me. I heard what you said at that meeting, and that's what I think too. And so you have to remember that if you're not there, who will be there? It's so important that we're there, and to really have confidence in your experience and your voice, but to surround yourselves with other strong women who are going to call you when they need to and say, no, call him right now, and say that's not okay, because sometimes you need that wind behind your back to remind you to keep your space and to feel confident that you're representing your community and you're there for a reason, and that perspective you bring is so important, because it's this perspective that only you can bring.
Well said. Well said. My turn? Power is the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. Minister Huey P. Newton. And that just simply means that power is able to determine an issue in your community, in your own personal life, anywhere, and change those conditions to make it fit what you need it to fit. So that means being able to tell the truth, to be courageous, and to stand up for that truth, even when no one else is speaking it. We got death threats because of Moms for Housing. We were told you can't just take someone's property to make a point. But then I thought, like, my parents, their parents' parents were told, you can't sit here, you can't ride this, you can't live here, you fill in the blank. And someone at some point had to have the courage to say, I deserve to live in my full power, in my full self. So if you are a young person, whatever you are, and you want to make a difference in your community, just get out there and do it. I get nervous every time I speak in front of people. My ears are so hot right now, you all wouldn't imagine. And my heart is beating so fast, but I do it because somebody needs to hear it. Somebody needs to see it. Even though I doubt myself. Well, thank you for clapping for doubting myself. It's not about me. It has never been about me. It's about the conditions that we need to transform in our communities. And if we're not doing it, then who else will? There's so many charlatans, so many frauds, so many people that just want to create a platform for their own personal egos. But when you sacrifice and when you get up every morning to make the world better, people are going to see it, people are going to feel it, and they're going to want to be involved. So if you have the courage to step out there on faith because you know something needs to change, the whole universe will conspire with you to achieve that goal.
Well, would you be willing to share, each of you, some of the challenges that you face as you've worked toward creating a California with homes, health, and wealth for all, and some of the ways that you've overcome those challenges? Is it either of you willing to leap ahead on that?
Yeah, no, there's a lot. There's a lot. As someone who's tried to place numerous places for unhoused people to be in my district, let me tell you, everybody wants a solution until the solution is nearby. And I think there's a lot of lack of awareness. So I remember when we were ending the exclusionary zoning, for instance, I had a lot of people who would call me and say, this isn't going to increase diversity, it's just going to increase the number of renters. And I was like, but renters are overwhelming, like more people of color are renters. And so I was like trying to have this whole conversation with them, but they weren't hearing me, obviously. But I think it's the misperceptions of what affordable housing is, who poor people represent. You know, I have a lot of conversations about public housing communities in my district where bad things might happen. Like we lost a young child in a shooting last fall, and they say, oh, it's because there's too many poor people in one spot. And I'm like, no, it's because we haven't invested enough to support that community so that they have what they need, right? And so this is the bias and I think naming the bias I have found to be really important, and it does really offend people. You know, if you really want to make someone mad, call out, you know, sort of the implicit bias that they're demonstrating. Be like, what I'm hearing you say is that you don't understand X, Y, Z. But it's important that we name that. And I believe that because when I did GARE, I remember I did the Government Addressing Racial Equity a long time ago before I was elected. And they talked about how we need to give people the opportunity to trigger the value set, right? That like people don't like racism, they don't like, you know, inequality, they don't like that sort of bias. But if you let it skate under the radar without calling it out, you're not giving the people the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't like that. You know, for exclusionary zoning, it finally gave people a chance to be like, no, I don't like the fact that we have predominantly white neighborhoods still in Sacramento. I want this to be more diverse, and so I am going to fight for this because I want those things. So you have to call the elephant in the room sometimes what it is, and that is hard, and it makes a lot of people angry sometimes, as I'm experiencing in more ways than not, but it's important because you have to be able to tell people that's the only way to move forward, is to be able to confront why we're here, what led us here, and what it's going to take for us to get out of this is recognizing those issues and confronting them head on.
Absolutely.
Would you like to add to the challenges?
Oh, I'm so caught up in the answer. What was the question?
The way I asked it, I believe, was, so what challenges have you faced as you work toward creating a California with homes, wealth, and health for all, and what have you done to overcome those challenges?
The status quo is what it is because so many realities are connected to it. So when I come in trying to change the conditions because that's what the immediate context calls for, then that ruffles feathers. And even it ruffles feathers of good people, right? Good people who are used to doing things in a certain way. And homelessness, I think, is a good barometer for that, because every solution that I've brought to the table has been met with, we can't do it, we can't, no, it's not gonna work. Okay, well, what does work, right? So I think creative solutions are challenging to people who are used to doing things in a certain way. And so you just push through and get more people on your side, because that's really what it's about. Before I was on council, we used to have conversations about, like, can you count to 5? Right? That's how many votes we need on council to pass something. And it's true for any legislative body. How many votes do you need to win? But the people are so key in that. So that's why no matter what I do, what position I hold, I'm always going to stay close to the streets, because street heat can change things. And that's why we need more people active. We need voting rights to be solidified in every state in the union. And we need people active in their governments, because when I lose footing with being able to influence people in the elected body, it's those constituents, those testimonies, those real life stories that can get on the phone, that can shut things down, that can vote to make their wills heard, that are all the difference.
Well, so I've got the last couple of questions here, but I want to remind folks, if you have a question on a card, please hold it up. You have 10 more minutes. Hold up the card. If you're watching live, then there's the question function, the Q&A box in Zoom. Put in those questions, and we will get to those as well. So I'm going to ask a couple more here. I've got some in hand. You sort of began to answer, Councilmember Fife, in terms of our Housing California theory of change is that you can't end the housing crisis in California without people power. And can you talk maybe more specifically about how some of the grassroots organizing makes your job easier and harder? And what kind of grassroots organizing do you hope for in the future on this issue?
I hope for a future that people whose lives have been negatively impacted by systemic inequality to not just have a seat at the table, but are creating the rooms and building the tables, because equity is not just about, you know, people being able to say what's of concern. It's, once again, it goes back to that definition of power. It's being able to impact the decisions that are made. So just like, I'm kind of past this thing of like speaking truth to power. I want to have my voice be that power. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get really corny, like with Dune. Did y'all see Dune? Mm-hmm. Like, or even read the book? It's like, when they said this word, it's just like, it just like cracks the foundation of the ground. I'm trying not to swear. Just breaks the foundation. That's the type of transformative power that people need in order to create the change that's necessary for our planet to continue. Not just housing, but for us to breathe the air and have fresh water to drink with the environmental challenges that we're facing, especially in California. So power is, and people power is more than just about saying things, but having those things that you utter actually be the change that happens in the world.
That's powerful. Well, so let me ask you the same question. I'll state it again, that our theory of change here at Housing California is that you can't end the housing crisis in California without people power. And how does grassroots organizing make your job easier? And also, how does it make it harder? And what would you hope for?
No, I have this vision now. So we just finished an 8-day strike at our Sac City Unified School. Some of you might have heard about that. And I was really honored to be helping the unions at the bargaining table for a good chunk of that time. And what I realized, the level of time it takes and investment it takes to build the foundation for a movement like that is not to be underestimated, right? I mean, this is work. It's real work. You know, you can't just snap your fingers and make a Facebook event and say, hey, everybody call in a council on Tuesday. I mean, it takes person to person and communication systems and real education and thought and process for you to build a movement where not one teacher that got pulled off that line wasn't right on point with why they were there, with what they were looking for, with why they were fighting. And it built a movement that couldn't be cracked. And they tried to crack it, but it couldn't be. And at the end of this Sunday, you know, after this devastating day we had, I got the text that the deal had finally been reached and that they were reopening the schools, and it got the unions what they wanted. And I really appreciated just how much work that was and just how much time that was, but how much investment that was in every single one of those union members who now have that power and have those skill sets and are now out in their community doing great work. And I think what we're doing now, because when I first came into office, I was like, all right, my first thing is I want these tenant protections to kick in after 30 days. Right now, they don't kick in for a year under our tenant protection program. Why, from a policy perspective? I don't know. So I started a very simple question with, if it's good after a year, why isn't it good after 30 days? I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm just making a business deal. And most business deals after 30 days, you're like, all right, it's good. And I couldn't get past 2. I couldn't get past 2 of 9 people, and I was like, okay, like this is, so we're building now with new council members coming in with, and a community group, how do we build that infrastructure in our communities? So in 2023, the minute that new council is set, we're bringing back inclusionary housing, we're bringing back stronger tenant protections, we're starting to move that agenda as quickly as we can, and how do we spend this time to build? And so that's what we're doing in Sacramento now, is taking the time to build, which is hard because sometimes that means letting those advocacy feel-good moments slip by, but what it does for us is it gives us, I remember there was this eviction that was gonna happen of some tenants in a hotel recently, and it was in my colleague's district who doesn't really agree with me, and I called him and said, hey, I don't know if you know this thing is happening, and he was like, it shouldn't be happening. I'm like, well, too bad, they're doing it anyways, and they're meeting at City Hall, and I'm gonna be there because they're there and they have real demands, and so it gave me the clearance as an elected to be like, sorry, they're there, there's 100 of them, I'm gonna show up because like, we gotta do something about this, and it forced him to come in and help negotiate a deal for those tenants as well. But I think it really gives it that tug and pull. And it's also a practical thing of that we can't consult a majority on our boards, right? I mean, I can't secure the votes for anything on anything I pass, and I need that partnership. And so the more I can make them strong and give them those tools and that infrastructure so that they have people in every council district who know the talking points, who can fight, who know what to do, the more we're going to be able to push the big, bold policy that we need.
Yep.
And the more it will last beyond us, right, Carol?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, so someone asked something sort of related where many other cities are not lucky enough to have such leaders as yourselves to champion housing. So what do you recommend that we do to nudge the anti-development council members toward a more pro-housing stance?
I'm gonna, I'll say something mildly controversial, but that's okay. You do have people in every single one of your cities that are pushing this. They just might not be the elected officials. So the real question is, how do you get them into those seats? And that's the real question, because this isn't a matter of not understanding what the crisis is, right? You know, this isn't a matter of they know that the rents are going up. They know that housing is getting more expensive. They know what's happening. If you have entrenched decision makers, how much energy and time are you wasting trying to change that person's mind when you could be trying to lift up that housing advocate, that neighborhood advocate, who could be the perfect person for that seat? And I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here in this space, because I think this is a nonprofit conference, but I'm just going to put it out there.
You're a guest. You can
it
say
is.
anything you like.
I mean, you have, in every single one of your cities, you have tenants, you have organizers, you have organizations that are fighting for these changes. It just might not be the people who are in those seats yet.
That is a great point. I was in public housing when I was running for my seat. The Chamber of Commerce put on a mailer in opposition to me. This person was evicted from her home. Is this the type of representative that you want for your city? I defeated a 2-term incumbent that everybody said was impossible because she had all of the money from the developers, all of the money from the chamber, all of the party, elected officials, and there was no way this formerly evicted public housing tenant, renter, could ever win a seat.
Huh?
And here I am.
Well, so we're down to the last couple minutes here, and so I guess I'd like to ask, we have an audience here of folks who are activists, who are concerned about housing. If you were to put out a call to action, what would you ask folks walking away from this conference to go home and do?
I will start, because I firmly believe that you should not just exist as C3s, that every C3 organization needs to be connected to a C4 and a PAC. And I believe that very firmly, and there are a lot of organizations and groups that will help you with that if you don't know how, but we've got to operate on the multiple planes where these decisions are being made. We've got to recognize the system that we are fighting within. And if we can't influence who gets into those seats, we're never gonna get to the policy outcome we need. These two things are connected. And we have to start building systems where voters are engaged, not just at election time, but when the policy proposals start coming up. And when it's time for accountability, they turn around and they're doing the voter forms. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because ACE has this infrastructure, which is why they've been so effective, but we all need to be able to recognize the system that we're playing within. And I tell every policy intern I get, it's not enough to be right. If it was enough to be right, then our policy landscape would look very different. You have to recognize the politics and be structured. If you can't do it through your government organization, partner with somebody who can, because we need to have that infrastructure if we're gonna build the lasting change that we need in all of our cities.
I love that. I love that. Oh. And my volunteer campaign organization in the structure, they've built out to do exactly what you said. And I've been a part of campaigns for several years now, and I was actually pushed into running for office. But I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to build a structure that allows us to campaign year-round, because everything should be a campaign, right? Like, if we're fighting for inclusionary zoning, which is something that we're doing in the city of Oakland right now, along with our public bank and other things of that nature, then we can't just do it every other November. So I would say that if you are activated and you want to get organized and you're not a part of an organization, find some in the city where you are and get involved. And if there's nobody that you like, talk to your neighbors, your family and friends, and create your own. Because it doesn't take everybody, it just takes the right bodies. And if you can get a few gathered in the name of what you think is right and what needs to be happening, you can make miracles happen. I've done it with 2 and 3 people, right, at different times in my life, and it is possible. So once again, if you do not have the organization in your vicinity that you want to work with, it's difficult, but it can be done. It's possible. And tweet at me, and then I'll tell you who's in your area too.
Yeah.
We can send
We
folks out
probably
to
got
help
some
you.
good contacts for you.
Yeah,
so let us know.
we can send some folks to support and help wherever you are. And I was going to say California, but probably nationally.
Okay. And your Twitter handle is in your bio in Hoover, I'm hoping?
Probably.
Probably, okay.
There's Carol Fife with 2 R's and 2 L's. You can find me. Don't believe the bad stuff.
Well, that's probably a good place. We're at time here, but I appreciate you making those calls to action. Let's thank Councilmember Fife, Councilmember Valenzuela for the time with us today. We really appreciate the kind of visionary leadership that you bring and the fact that you're working at the local level to bring about change, and that's the kind of change that everyone here can imagine. That's what's important, is something within our grasp. So thank you for bringing that to us. For business here, just don't forget to check out the person and virtual exhibit hall to meet in the amazing conference sponsors after this plenary concludes and before your next workshop. We're going to stop on time so you can do that. And please, if you, for those of us who are joining us in person this year, we look forward to seeing you at the conference networking reception sponsored by Sunrun, starting at 5 p.m. today on the terrace outside. You'll be able to grab your complimentary drink ticket as you enter the reception. And with that, one more big round of applause for these amazing leaders. Thank you very much for the honor of being able to host this conversation with these leaders, and please enjoy the rest of this conference and learn. Thank you.